The year was 2016, it had been 6 years since the first Red Dead Redemption had released, and Rockstar had no reason to make another game with the erupting monetary success of Grand Theft Auto Online. Even if there was, it would be another GTA. You see, they were making astronomical monthly sales, more so than games that had been released that very month, making ridiculous money, so seemingly all hope was lost until October rolled around. But there was still one problem that remained. How could Red Dead Redemption 2 possibly live up to expectations? Surely no game could possibly be as good as what I was picturing in my head. After all, no games are perfection, and there are very few games that even come close. However, I soon came to learn that Red Dead Redemption 2 is certainly a member of that exclusive club. So this is the brilliance of Red Dead Redemption 2. A strong, intense beginning is mandatory for a great game to grow interest in the rest of the journey, so opting for a linear start was a great way to show how together the gang was, even in a time of desperation, with the gang on the run from the law after a failed robbery in Blackwater, John, the main character from the previous installment, missing, and 2 gang members having just passed away. While looking for some food for the group, Arthur, Dutch and Micah run into and take down members of the rival O'Driscoll gang, but meet a girl, Sadie, who was just made a widow by them. They graciously take her in, showing they have better morals than your average run-of-the-mill gang, piquing your curiosity very early on. The fact that this group of supposed bad people have morals make each question they ask, task they do, victory they accomplish worth listening to and watching. However, Rockstar also made some fairly bold decisions early on which, if gone wrong, could leave a bad taste in players' mouths. John not exactly being the most respected gang member and looked down upon by Arthur was a calculated move, allowing us to witness the character development of an individual we already know the fate of. We see Hosea, Dutch and Arthur all have a major influence on moulding him. Not only that, Javier telling John that he isn't gonna die yet after being mauled by a pack of wolves show Rockstar know exactly what we're thinking. They know we know how he's gonna die and that nothing John experiences in this game will be as gut-wrenching as it would be otherwise, but that self-awareness was just enough to acknowledge it without overdoing it to spoil the rest of the experience. John's progression as a character is best exemplified through Arthur going through phases of calling him Marston, then John, then brother. John goes from a father abandoning his family, accusing the kid of not being his, to one who Arthur would be proud of. Arthur went from scolding him for being a bad father to aiding him to become a more supportive and competent father and partner for Abigail. He pushed him in every way a brother can push: tough love, empathy and support. And even years after his passing, John still looks to Arthur for guidance in asking Abigail to marry him, showing his respect for his fallen brother by proposing with his ring. This game truly makes John's redemption in the first game all the more impactful. The man goes from running off to the shop for some milk to giving his life for his family. In spite of taking some of his advice, John disobeyed him when a rapidly deteriorating Arthur told him not to look back once he and his family leave this life, and look at where that got him. When Sadie warns John if finding Micah is what he really wants to do because of everything he can lose, little did he know that was the very reason he loses everything in the end, because it leads to Agent Ross locating him, as they had a deal which meant Micah would give them Dutch, which is why he lured the fellow out there with a promise of the Blackwater money in the first place. Therefore, John is forced to do what Michael was meant to and take down the remainder of the gang. It's a travesty when you remember what happens in the first game and it comes full circle. Realization sinks in that the revenge both the player and John strive so hard to retrieve was what sealed his, and in turn his son's, fate of becoming exactly what they didn't want him to be: a gunslinger. This poetic nature to the franchise adds to the weight of emotions caused by the connective tissue Red Dead Redemption 2 built to the first game. It truly feels like no stone was left unturned. This game went so full circle that everything made sense by the end of it, including questions the second game brings up about the first, such as how Arthur doesn't even get a mention out of John in the first game. On the ranch, Abigail mentions that she don't talk about him because it invokes too much emotion out of her husband. So it makes sense why he doesn't bring up his emotional turmoil when he's doing a job for the government where he has to strip all emotions out of himself as he's being sent to murder his former brothers in order order to return to his family who they've taken from him. Speaking of the devil, Arthur Morgan. Arthur mentions his son Isaac and his mother getting brutally murdered in such a nonchalant manner as optional dialogue late in the game to Rain's fault. That pivotal moment in the protagonist's life is only mentioned twice throughout the entire game, making that piece of information all the more fascinating and vital in understanding the character's outlook in the earlier sections of the game, especially on his perception of John abandoning his family. Not everything has to be made such a big deal out of, but if subtly woven in, it fundamentally amplifies the impact it has on the player. Isaac's death explains Arthur's contempt for John. In spite of him outwardly only stating he feels he betrayed the gang by leaving, nobody else felt that way. This gave it a deeper meaning. He felt hurt that John was willing to throw away his kin when his got taken from him. This is just a smidgen of what makes this fella such a compelling character. Arthur's forced to do bad things at the start. He doesn't necessarily want to do it, but he has to. He's got to look after the camp, the gang. People are counting on him, and he hasn't been taught any other way. There are moments in this game before his diagnosis that show this human side to him, making him redeemable. After all, he's just looking out for his family. Look at him breaking Micah out. He's doing what's good for the gang, but angry that he was put in a position to have to commit a massacre of all those people for such a foolish reason. He doesn't want to do more than he has to for the camp. This is portrayed well from Arthur's interactions with Mary, his ex-fiancée. We learned that he gave up his potential life with her because of the potential casualties with the gang that would stem from him leaving. He knows why he's so valuable to the gang and sticks to it. He's a tough, shit-talking gunslinger because that's what Dutch needs him to be. That doesn't mean he isn't a big softie at heart. There are many moments where he opens up, even at early points in the game. Mary Lenton, Mary Beth, Tilly and Karen are all able to bring out this softer side to Arthur, showing he cares about them and what they think of him. Why? He doesn't want to be robbing and killing. He does it because he has to. Look at this early mission in chapter 2. Uncle Arthur and the girls from camp are going to Valentine to look for some jobs. On their way there, they come across a man whose carriage crashed. He even tells the woman that if they weren't there, he'd probably have robbed him, showing that he does exactly what he needs to do for the camp, but doesn't want to be seen as just a brute, especially by the fairer sex. Mary Beth also acts as a therapist of sorts at times for Arthur. He chooses to reveal his deep inner thoughts to her while he doesn't even think to discuss any of this with Dutch, a so-called father figure, or any other man in the camp for that matter. And all of these positives to his character make him all the more relatable when he begins his redemption arc, because it's realistic. Arthur experiences the entire process of terminal illness in front of us. His conversation with Sister about it was great. Brilliantly conceptualized the emotions and thoughts of anyone who would have a terminal disease. Arthur letting out that he's afraid is beautiful and would get anyone void of emotion choked up. They handled Arthur's death so well. Rockstar tend to do that with their protagonists. We were there with Arthur as he got tuberculosis from Mr. Downs, but we were still unsuspecting until it got explained to us and everything clicked, even with the progressive symptoms. For people such as myself who played the first game, who knew with almost certainty Arthur was going to kick the bucket, this was a great narrative route to take to make his impending death shocking, but not too ridiculous to the point where the murderer in a murder mystery is someone we haven't met. The best plot twists aren't ones that you can't see coming, it's ones that you should have seen coming. And this is a prime example of that. Narratively speaking, that revelation is what gave Arthur a change of heart, kickstarting his redemption arc. I commend that Red Dead 2 allows us to experience all aspects of his redemption arc. In the first game, you learn about John's past through stories the characters tell and play through his redemption, but allowing you to experience the entire arc as a whole through your gameplay, going from intimidating people to take money from them to saving Mrs. Downs and her son from a life of misery makes it feel all the more real. They fed the outlaw aspect to the players first before making them want to be good and repent to give Arthur the redemption he desires. It really elicits guilt for how the player may have treated characters or acted prior to discovering Arthur's tuberculosis diagnosis. Now on to the messiah of the gang. Dutch van der Linde is one of the most complex characters in gaming in my book. When we meet Dutch in the first game, we see a man only a shell of what he once was, but the wisdom and charisma was certainly not lacking, as we see from his final speech to John. This charisma was what made him such a pivotal character in the prequel. We saw the instability in Dutch, but we cared for him just as Arthur did because we valued his vision of freedom from civilization. He treats everyone fair. Charles makes that clear very early on. civilization tends not to do that. Milton, the law-abiding Pinkerton, and Dutch are two very similar people on opposite sides. Milton sees the propaganda that is clearly present, but what he doesn't see is that Dutch stands by it. Dutch wasn't a leader that hides behind braver people to do his actions for him. He went out to fight in the trenches, he went to kill Bronte, save Jack, kill Colm. He doesn't shy away from getting down and dirty. That's what makes him more believable and makes you want to fight with and for him. Although at the beginning we hear talk about a job in Blackwater going wrong and Dutch ending up shooting a girl, any doubt surging through our heads about that man's intentions are put at ease when he not only saves but takes in Sadie, who at that point has nothing to offer the gang. This completely legitimizes his supposed good intentions. In that moment, everyone had Dutch's back. Both us and the characters. Even with others doubting him already, it's easy to shrug them off and get on board with Dutch's ideology despite some glaring mistakes made. With Dutch, it seemed his instability was always there, but he always had his advisor and best friend Hosea, who always knew what was best for the gang, keeping him level-headed. Dutch at that point was even aware that his best friends Arthur and Hosea talked behind his back and was unbothered by it, because his major mistakes were yet to be made. Therefore, he didn't require a stroking of his ego yet. Where everything went south for him and the gang was after Hosea's death. That led to more frequent poor decisions. I mean, you can see just how lost he was without him. And unfortunately, those poor decisions were plain and obvious for everyone to see after they were made, including Dutch. So when other characters such as Arthur and John went against him, he never took the time to rationalize why they were doing it, since he already knew it was because he was making poor decisions and they were doubting him. And thus he was fearing a betrayal from the very people that would never turn their back on him. His self-doubt led to the gang's downfall because the only person to feed his ego was the one person who didn't care for him or the gang. The rat Micah Bell, but of course he said otherwise. The group were doomed from the moment Dutch felt he owed anything to Micah for saving his life, as that resulted in him joining the gang, as mentioned by Micah around the campfire. And as the story progresses, Dutch digs the hole even deeper as he brought the situation in on them, and doesn't want to accept the fact that he's been played like a fiddle by Micah, a man who at one point was plotting to hand Dutch over to the Pinkertons, as can be seen by the wanted poster of him found near his campfire following the big strawberry breakout. But he was. Micah's outright villainous nature is well hidden. Never did they actually spell it out until Micah tells Arthur. There are even missions which can give the player a red herring, such as where he encourages the truce with the O'Driscolls, which makes it seem like he at least has his heart set in the right place and cares for the good of the gang. But it becomes clear later on that this was all just a self-preservation tactic. Micah's introduction was the cause of a shift from the gang being a movement to a business. It was only at that point that Dutch got Strauss to start up the loan shark for the gang. The fella was obsessed with going back for the Blackwater money as opposed to the safety of the people like Hosea was. All that being said, it's worth bringing up, when escaping the tram station Bronte told them would hold a lot of money, Dutch's non-killing innocent side shows by not shooting the tram driver, just by throwing him overboard. Soon after that incident was Hosea's death. Following that, Arthur's response to Dutch murdering an innocent old lady in Guarma in front of him shows his descent into madness, because this event showed a completely different behaviour pattern than displayed at the tram station. Micah enabling this cutthroat, business-minded behaviour with a lack of Hosea reining him in caused it when the lady tried to rip him off. Dutch used to be a beacon of hope for people like that poor old lady. Outcasts of civilization. Dutch always made it seem like he was more than just another outlaw, that he was above killing innocent people or revenge. Boy, was that wrong in the end. Telling himself he's got a plan and asking people to have faith in him is a way of reassuring himself that he's good enough to get them out of this mess. That's why whenever Micah sets up the bait of feeding his ego, he goes with it, because it gives him exactly what he wants, an easy way out. And it doesn't help with Micah gaslighting the situation, getting him to turn on Arthur and John for not feeding his ego, making it seem like they were the ones betraying him. Even towards the end, before killing Leviticus Cornwall, when Micah suggests cutting loose some of the weaker members of the gang, Dutch doesn't even entertain that idea. And nobody's around him, who would he be putting on the show for? That's legitimate. He still has a glimmer of goodwill in him. It's just that it's been coerced and manipulated into this paranoid, egotistical, me against the world mindset. Regardless, after all this, not only does Arthur see that Dutch has changed, he sees that the whole damn gang's philosophy and way of life has been altered. As Arthur once said, we rob people who rob other people. There used to be a Robin Hood type figure for the poor, not anymore. This becomes no more apparent to him than in the final loan shark missions, where he sees just how much what they're doing is affecting the very people they used to help. And obviously so much so that he feels inclined to kick Strauss out of the gang even when there are actually much more pressing matters to tend to in and around the camp. He may not have been the best person, but that was not the way to go about that, especially when there's worse problems within the gang. But it just shows how rough around the edges these characters are. Even when trying to be a better person, Arthur still makes mistakes. And as it turned out, this guy was loyal until the very end. He didn't sell them out to the Pinkertons despite being beaten and tortured for information on the gang's whereabouts. Therefore, to me, it came across like a personal vendetta Arthur had for him. Arthur blamed him for getting TB and didn't want more lives to be ruined because of him. So taking that agency away from the player in a game full of morality-based decisions to make, particularly in those final Loan Shark missions, allowed us to see where Arthur was as a person and where his mind was far more effectively. And as we saw in their final meeting, when Arthur tells him just how much he tried for him, Dutch is speechless, knowing he can't suppress the fact that he knew he wasn't making the right decisions any longer, which is why he doesn't go with Micah and later finds him to gun him down. When John went up to find Micah on the summit and was pleading with him, Dutch didn't need convincing. He already knew why he was out there, but seeing John again was reminding him of all the poor decisions he had made. Therefore, he momentarily took his eye off the ball, again showcasing the different dimensions to his character. At the beginning, he's so considerate. He allowed John back into the camp despite abandoning them and his family. If Dutch was using people by making them owe him something, like helping Arthur and John at a young age, it doesn't make sense. What would he be using them for? He always seemed insistent on money and retirement overseas. But if that's what they were being used for, why would they have previously been so generous and given to the poor? Doesn't line up with that personality. Going back to the gang as a whole, however, despite them having a common purpose, the different backgrounds of the characters helps you appreciate them as individuals and thus their collective ideals. They were brought together in search of the American dream, the one they believe Uncle Sam itself has been straying from with the development of civilization. All the characters were able to think for themselves. This wasn't Arthur's story, but the whole gang's. Look at Karen becoming an alcoholic after Sean, her lover's death, and laying it on Miss Grimshaw for shooting Molly, as she was just crazy in love and wanted Dutch's attention. Look at Micah murdering the gang's dog, Sadie being hellbent on slaughtering all the O'Driscolls, or Bill and Javier siding with Dutch in the final showdown because of the tough situations he's helped them out of before they joined the gang, as told through optional dialogue and eavesdropping in and around the camp. John deciding to be with his family, Charles leaving the gang to help the Native Americans, Mary Beth becoming an author, Pearson opening up a general store. This all shows a level of independence to these people. Every character in Red Dead Redemption 2, main or otherwise, has their own in-depth story, rather than them being present solely to cater to Arthur's narrative, giving the world a much larger meaning. Look at all the people Arthur helped talk to John after so many years. They change, they evolve, because this is a living, breathing world. The story is not simple-minded. It adds a serious level of depth to the lore that somehow makes playing the first game again feel almost like playing it for the first time again, which is an experience we never get to have with our favourite pieces of media. You'd notice things that you wouldn't have before, like when John was about to die, he tells Abigail and Jack to not look back, just like Arthur told him, which we wouldn't have known when initially playing the first game, or why John doesn't talk about Arthur anymore. It makes everything more meaningful, everything. Moreover, being able to have closure with these characters when you play as John is great. It leaves very few loose ends and doesn't do away with those characters. Life goes on, and they go their separate ways, which was seemingly inevitable because of the aforementioned wildly different backgrounds. But that doesn't mean there isn't a sense of longing for one another. Pivoting slightly away from the main story, the plot truly incentivizes you to explore more, and not for some meaningless stat boosts. Dutch saying everyone needs to provide for the camp, or helping Arthur get his redemption post-diagnosis by looking introspectively at the actions you have made as Arthur during your course of playing the game, or making you want to help the widow or Mrs. Downs. You want Arthur to feel like he's trying to redeem his mistakes for the remainder of his life. It's not necessary, but it ever so cleverly pushes you to want to do those things and venture off into the wider world. It's therapeutic, fulfilling and tranquil in an otherwise constantly evolving savage world. Not to mention the serenity when I chose to venture around the map, just me and my horse, looking for places to go fish, because surprisingly fishing was actually fun in Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2 is meticulous in its pursuit of realism. The entire game essentially opens its arms up to you if you embrace its slow and methodical pace and carefully structured world. Some of the best moments were in camp, doing chores, keeping an eye out for an item someone lost rushing away from the last campsite, having the stew you hunted for, partying after a successful mission, and listening to the tales sat around the campfire. This kept you steady, celebrating with the others after saving Jack from Angelo Bronte, helping you recognize the feat you accomplished. This slow burn grows your attachment to the gang, intensifying your pain when the gang inevitably collapsed. Not being at the camp for a while, Dutch sends someone to see if you're okay, showing they care. Or when Jim Milton is living a simple farming life, milking cows and herding sheep, it shows just how much he's trying for his family to have a normal life, or as normal as possible for them. This makes the blow even greater when Abigail takes Jack and leaves John. We know just how hard he's been trying through all these mundane tasks, and even more so with all the shenanigans he went through to win her back. These aspects were very cleverly implemented. Turning off the minimap, going into first person, and just wandering to experience the living, breathing world in all of its glory in the midst of gang activity or the internal civil war allows you as Arthur to enjoy the nuances of life. The wildlife was truly something to behold. Observing from a distance as a passerby has its own merits. Watching nature unfold, nothing in this world is static, and all in such rich and gorgeous environments that were so well crafted. Venturing off into the snowy mountains, the meadows, the muddy swamps and the deserts all conveyed a different feeling. You could be in a secluded desert environment but still be in awe at the atmosphere because it was all intentional. It all felt natural, not overly done. The environments felt alive, not just a canvas for the story to take place, but rather this story was taking place in this world. Searching in every region of the map for animals and plants indigenous to particular areas. Spotting the animals with your binoculars, then hunting them down without startling them, with the particular weapon and specifically tailored ammunition crafted by your bare hands that wouldn't damage the quality of the prey's meat and pelt required a patience that matches the feeling of hunting in real life. That, coupled with realistic animations of the animals and skinning the hunted, allows you to feel like you've truly earned your next piece of clothing or that meal for camp. And your clothing is pivotal for survival. It's not just an inessential stat boost, but to combat weather conditions, as it's used for in real life. The importance of this is signified when you don't have the appropriate clothing. Your health or stamina can be drained as a result. It has a realism to it. You earn it by skinning animals and bringing the pelt to the trapper, allowing you to craft a garment of your choice, not by randomly getting it as a reward for completing a mission. Animals aren't littered around the place with no real purpose. There's a real immersive, realistic incentive to watch and hunt all the animals. Collecting their pelts, bringing the food back to camp, it's all for a reason. From the dense cities like Saint Denis to the small towns of Valentine, the variety left nothing out. Each visited area had meaning and gives a different feeling to the player. They truly lacked monotony and each town had very recognizable features. It was far from generic. So many random secrets. Just strolling around you can find a reference to Bonnie McFarlane and her history, a character from the first game that doesn't even show up for the campaign of this one. It's lovely that they thought to give fans these little things to make them happy that they explored the world. You can even find the graves of those who died, gang members and Mr. Downs alike, as well as towns changing over time, or areas appearing different than earlier on in the game, such as Armadillo, or finding Catherine Braithwaite's crisp corpse after being burned alive in a blaze at the manor shows how passing of time affects the world and is not solely a cosmetic, but you can actually interact with the world, portraying the ever-changing, constantly evolving world present in the game. Pollution through the coal mining in Annesburg causing rainbow-coloured water, very detailed. Mangy animals in locales with toxic water supply, as shown in Elysian Pool nearby. Predator birds swooping up fish from water or snakes from land as shooting it nets you 2 carcasses to skin. See what I mean? Living, breathing world. You can go throughout the entire game not noticing these details, such as how scavenger birds surround dead carcasses upon hunting them, but it makes it all the more rewarding when you spot them. Possums playing dead, alligators munching on corpses in water. It portrays unique animal characteristics and behavior patterns. Beavers found around chewed on tree bark. All of these actions give these animals their individuality. Not every predator in the game behaves the same. Black bears are much more frightened of humans than, say, a panther, or even other types of bears. Another way to give individuality to these animals and make wildlife feel more alive. Crabs scurrying along the beach, tracking and hunting those legendary animals makes you feel like you belong in a home of taxidermy saturated with all your larger-than-life trophies. Whistling to garner the attention of your prey, having them stick their head out so you can plant one between their eyes. How animals interact with each other. The amount of times I've seen wolves fighting a bear or vultures surrounding your hunted carcasses if you haven't yet skinned it. And that's just it. Nothing in this world's been designed without purpose. Don't get it twisted. Bringing food and money to the camp feels rewarding, particularly after the camp parties show how much they all care for and love one another. And that's just it. It's all done to elicit a legitimate emotional response to the content of the game, rather than false satisfaction for having ticked off another box in an open world checkbox. Every crevice of the world has some lore to uncover. The vampire, the widow, the incestuous siblings, the random events such as the clan and the beggars on the street. The random encounters in mostly unspecified locations you experience keep the game from feeling rigid and makes it feel more natural and fluid. Different gangs encounter you in various fashion. You can find someone who has been bitten by a venomous snake and save them by sucking the poison out, or by giving the medicine for it if you have any, only for them to pay you back later by putting something on their tab at the store later on. Someone could be attacked by a cougar and need help fending it off. Bottle shooting competitions, encountering Nigel. Gavin! Encountering bounty hunters, bringing in fugitives. Either kill them and free the bounty, or get the reward yourself. Going past the gunsmith's cellar window, someone asks you to free him. So you point the gun at the clerk and you find out that he dressed the man like a kid and is treating him like his son since he lost his son and just wants to fill the void. Drop off someone who fell off his horse to a doctor. He says he has to amputate his arm. If you stick around, you can see it happen. Not to mention the tree falling in the wrong direction with the workers cutting it, causing it to trap a worker. After freeing him, you can see his leg is busted and choose to give him $5. The way you treat all these random encounters and stranger missions could enhance your own experience of Arthur's redemption arc. It's great when you come across a random encounter multiple times and they continue the dialogue and not regurgitate the same nonsense. For example, the veteran, after you befriend him for the first time, he acknowledges it, and the second time he asks for your name. This allows for same or similar encounters to have a new lease of life. Another example is the clan have 3 locations, and depending on the time of day, they all show. They are all different events by the same group, making it seem more random than if whenever you come across them, the same event occurs. Red Dead Redemption 2 truly has a multitude of random roadside curiosities to inspect and sketch onto your journal. The entire world is so well considered that even with its size, every location is so dense and recognizable. It was far from a Control-C and Control-V type job. Segueing on to your pride and joy in this game, most of this Wild West experience is spent unsurprisingly on or with your horse. Having to look after it grows an attachment towards it, a love and care for whatever happens to it. Arthur's horse is just as part of the gang as any other member. She saves him from the O'Driscolls and helps him get John to safety. Whether you stick by one horse throughout or not, there's no doubt feeding it, cleaning it, brushing it, talking to it develops a deep connection with it. Some of them are unique horses, like from the specific mission, such as Buell, who you obtain from a veteran who succumbs to his injuries, or from a specific area. These factors all lead to a level of attachment and care you have for the horse, which magnifies the pain felt when the horse dies in Chapter 6. While the loyal steed dying to save the main character is quite an overused trope, the intentional way Rockstar forces the player to develop a bond with the horse keeps it fresh and allows them to elicit the desired emotion from the player. Biggest compliment I can give it for the relationship it builds between the player and the horse is that even after max bonding with my steed, I still feed her, brush her, talk to her, and all around flurry her with affection. And while the gameplay appears to be just a generic third-person shooter on the surface, there are some facets of it that add to the immersion of the game. The slow-paced combat makes it feel like you're truly in a situation where you're about to fight to the death. The weapon sway when you get shot adds a sense of realism. If you get shot, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to pick off your enemies one by one just like that, but it makes it all the more satisfactory when you do. Deadeye makes you feel like a true gunslinger, allowing you to headshot multiple enemies in one go, giving an element of swagger to the otherwise slow and sluggish gameplay. Using it can help shoot and disarm your enemies, and just being able to coolly holster your weapon makes you feel like a prime Clint Eastwood. Despite all that, the varied missions were so welcome. Going to Valentine with the ladies of the camp, showing Arthur's soft side, finding a new camp to move to, getting drunk with Lenny, going to posh boat parties, building a house for your family with Charles and Uncle, or hunting O'Driscolls with Sadie. None ever felt unneeded or boring, and most importantly, none felt repetitive. The world building scattered throughout is second to none. Even on the night out you have with Lenny, you see the big guy Arthur previously beat to a pulp, suffering from memory loss. Such a well constructed level, with quality humour but a dash of reality check, exploring the consequences of what you have previously done as Arthur. Goes to show, these missions are not necessarily completely played out throughout a level. No, they play out into the wider world. Even the varied deaths are worth mentioning. While a lot of the game was a cinematic masterclass, killing off Lenny, such a beloved character during a gameplay, in a sudden, non-cutscene, albeit scripted manner was painful, but added a level of shock that may have started to alleviate for having it done straight after losing Hosea. The impact of it being done in that manner added a sense of realism to it. No, this isn't a movie. It's exactly how it would be done in real life. Someone you love gets shot that suddenly, you would lose them in a flash, not in a long drawn out cutscene. It was a good way of shocking the player about a death that you assumed was inevitable due to the downfall of the gang and his lack of presence in the first game. Some of the seemingly underappreciated details in the game include the sound design, which is great from day dot. Riding through the snow, making a realistic crunch, leaving behind believable footprints, not to mention muddy locales which can get all over you and your horse, which doesn't just disappear with time. Arthur's got to wash it off himself, take a bath and clean his own horse, unless he takes her swimming and washes off naturally. And that's just a fraction of the minute details that were so well thought out. A boat slowly sinking once you shoot at it with water seeping through the bullet hole, grabbing your hat when it falls off, or taking the enemy's hat once you take them down adds to the sense of looting. It's not just hovering over the corpse and pressing a button, no, there's a timely animation to show exactly what you're looting. Calming a horse before being able to tame or ride them makes them feel very alive, especially since their animations are so unbelievably realistic and not just limited to a minimal amount, so it doesn't lead to much repetition. I mean, just look at the sheer amount, how the horses shake their head or change their testicular size based on the climate, not to mention how they defecate every so often, or how different breeds of horses get agitated by predators by varying amounts, constantly antagonizing people at camp leading to one of them knocking you out to teach you a lesson, or Miss Grimshaw forcing you to take a shower if you're filthy enough. Not to mention that John can't swim either. Arthur makes fun of him for that, which is great for continuity. It's always great when people working on these games consider these details, especially when they go through the effort of making Arthur able to swim, meaning the two require separate animations for the same activity. And a shout out to Mary Beth's response to Arthur looking at her back. Goes to show the designers really put a lot of effort into the intelligence of the AI in this game. Red Dead Redemption 2 is the pinnacle of gaming in many ways, and I hope to have been able to shed a light on why this game is so brilliant in the eyes of many even 5 years after its release. Anyway, having reached the end of the video, I'd like to thank you for making it this far. This video was months in the making and I would really appreciate any engagement in the video, be it through likes, comments, shares or subscribing. Honestly, it would all be greatly appreciated. If this video does well, who knows, there could be more like it on the way. Anyway, till next time, see ya.